Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I know it's frustrating. Feel very bad about that. All right. So with the final paper, so technically, let's say the paper should be anywhere between 8 to 12 pages. Please no more than that.
8 to 12 pages.
Yeah, 8 to 12 pages. And I'm of the opinion if you can do quality in a shorter amount of space, I have no problem with that. In fact, be kind to the reader and think about, I do believe very strongly in an economy of words. I mean, the hardest book that I've ever written was that very short introduction to public administration, which was only 35,000 words. And I think by the time we got done cutting it, we ended up at 33,000 words. I'm actually proud of that, to be able to compress really complex thoughts into a kind of condensed space. And so I always look at those that are able to, because it is an art, right? Being able to pare something down to the essentials and sort of engage in an economy of words. So the main piece of this, I want you to choose a topic that, which you have, hopefully you've selected a topic, as I encourage you to do, that is something that's important to you, either personally or professionally, or both. Because if you don't choose something that you're excited about, you're not going to do a good job, because you're going to look at it as kind of a tick the box kind of assignment, and you're not going to really invest yourself. But if there's a direct relevance for you in your workspace, for example, in knowing about this particular policy or program, and then thinking about how the concepts and public policy process on the course relate to it, you're gonna engage more actively, you're just going to be generally more engaged with it if it has a personal meaning and value for you. Whereas if you just kind of, are doing the assignment to get a grade, which we all know that a lot of education is about, just getting that piece of paper, if that's what it's about, it's not going to be meaningful for you. And I'm of the opinion that at the graduate level, particularly the applied graduate level, this is a degree in Master's of Public Administration. It's not a degree in Master of Arts of Public Administration. So this is a kind of technical degree in that sense. So what that means is that it's very applied, and therefore the assignments that you're doing in this program should be very applied and meaningful to you in the immediate term. In other words, you're hopefully selected a topic that either as a citizen you're concerned about, or as a practitioner, and you want to know more about the subject so it can help you become a better public administrator or nonprofit administrator, right? And so think of it like that. Now, there are concepts that you're learning in this course about public policy process and how it works. And so the assignment is very applied in that sense, because it asks you to kind of put on your hat as both a kind of policy process consultant, policy consultant, but also to bring your skills as a public administrator to advise a hypothetical client or interest group. You can make it up, or you don't even have to specify it. I find that applied assignments help if you have a target audience in mind. So if you say, for example, well, I'm working for this group of insurance companies, healthcare, that are involved in health insurance, and I think that Obamacare is in need of reform, and they do as well. And we saw some of the failures, some of the good stuff about Obamacare, some of the pitfalls of Obamacare, and those that tried to reform it, and what the weaknesses were in trying to reform it. In many ways, the proposal to reform Obamacare would have taken the things that people don't like about it and made it much worse, right? For some, it was what Congress ended up not passing represented a kind of jump from the frying pan into the fire directly for some. And you could sort of say, well, knowing what we know about incrementalism and agenda setting, or knowing what we know about windows of opportunity and streams, as we're going to learn about. I'm not asking for the whole theory, just some concepts to show that you're thinking about how these concepts matter in the real world, right? And thinking through how that works. And basically just provide some process advice, some practical advice on how to get something on the agenda, move something from the systemic agenda to the formal agenda, or the institutional agenda we call it, and how you might do that. And don't worry about being wrong. Don't even, just put that out of your mind. I'm looking for creativity here, because in the real world, we know that getting to the right place involves a certain amount of trial and error. And that invariably means getting some stuff wrong. But eventually you get it right. And you may have seen in the additional article that I sent out that was co-authored by myself, Ardenza, and Henrik Manassians, that one of the case studies that we cite in that paper is the penicillin example, in which the scientist researching that ultimately is given credit for the discovery of penicillin was sparked, at least initially, by an accident in a lab, right? And growing spores accidentally on a culture, a specimen, right? And from there, an initial kind of aha moment came about. But if it had just stopped there, okay, that would have been a failed experiment. But there were others that picked up on it, saw value, and began to replicate the study, began to think about how growing cultures and bacterias to sort of stop the growth of infectious bacterias, and how that all worked, but was ultimately possible. But the initial experiment, which was unintentional, got an unintended result. It looked like a failure initially, ended up changing our whole view of infectious diseases, and it sparked a new field of epidemiology and transformed how we thought about how we treat infectious kind of bacteria-based diseases, and gave a whole new dimension to medicine and so forth. And so this is kind of like a breakthrough. And so in the same way, when we're thinking about how to introduce a new policy or reinvigorate a dying policy from a practical point of view, be creative and think about how you might spur this policy that you're interested in, or this program that you're interested in, back onto the agenda, or get it up on the agenda. So think about that, how you would do that, and be creative when you do so. So I want you to be willing to kind of take a risk. That's how the real world is messy, and so it involves trial and error, and it involves making mistakes or things that appear like mistakes, and then ultimately building upon them and finding out that you actually moved in a different direction. And this involves what we call paradigm shifts. We're actually changing the way we understand how the world works. So could you hold on 1 second? 1 second. Hold on 1 minute. sorry, that was the recycling guy. See, that's something, the policy issue that I'm really interested in is recycling here in Utah, because in California, particularly in Los Angeles, we just kind of take it for granted that we put trash in the separate trash containers and it automatically is just picked up from the curb. Here, we actually have to drive down to a receptacle center and put our trash and separate it ourselves at these big bins at these kind of centralized locations. Although this gentleman is very good because you pay him $5 a week and he comes and collects it and separates it. So it's a different set of, interestingly, it's a different set of values. We've tried to, I've tried to get my, one of my former students is one of the leading people here in Southern Utah on recycling policy. And he actually went through a version of this class where I actually asked him to apply the same concepts I'm teaching you to explain how to get recycling on the agenda. Because before that, we didn't have recycling here, and he's been one of the leaders in getting that up and running. So this stuff applies in the real world, even knocks on the door, right? Related to policy change. And eventually, what we're going to try to do is be able to get what we have in Los Angeles, which is what we have, curbside recycling pickup. And it's really amazing to me here in Utah, where so much of the tourist dollars drive the economy, that there is not kind of recycling emphasis as strongly as it might be, because the beauty of the area is what generates dollars here for the local economy. But again, it's a value set, and as we talked about with windows of opportunity related to John Kingdon streams, which we introduced very briefly last week. One of the things that creates windows of opportunity is when the values of the political stream, those operating in the political stream, sort of come together with those who are operating within what we call the problem stream. And so when we get a regime change, for example, like we have now at the presidential level, what ends up happening is that you end up with that change possibly having a receptive ear that you didn't have under the old regime when you were trying to get your policy up and it was just failing, right? Regime changes are very important in this process whenever you have a change in leadership, for example. And so when you're thinking about your own policy and how to move that onto the agenda, you might be able to say something like, and Christina needs a regime change at work. But, and it's perfectly realistic to understand where we are, where we're limited and where we're situated in our own workspaces and our own agencies, to be able to say, this is what I can do and this is what I can't do. But like W. Edwards Deming, the organizational theorist, tried to emphasize, you can affect a transformation in some humble way, no matter where you are. Never be falsely led into the belief that you don't have a sphere of influence. As public administrators, we have a sphere of influence of how we can affect organizational and policy changes wherever we are. And so when you're thinking, if you're thinking about, doing this hypothetical exercise as though, you're just, a pie in the sky policy consultant, policy process consultant, and you don't believe that, and you're just doing this for a class that you don't think you'll ever be in a position to really implement, that's not necessarily true at all. We, as public administrators, always have an opportunity through our own work ethic, through our own ability to what we call street level bureaucratic discretion, to be able to make judgment calls in line with the policy changes or the programmatic changes that we want to see on some small level. And the purpose of this exercise, the purpose of this paper, is to get you thinking strategically, right? So even though in reality in the next 2 years you may not be able to actually institute that policy, okay, by thinking strategically and understanding how policy process works, you can do your little bit from where you're sitting now in line with a larger view. And I think I mentioned before, Cheryl Spiller, who is the head of Department of Social Services, LA County. She started off as a secretary, okay? Now she runs one of the largest county agencies in LA County. Of all the 38 agencies, the Department of Social Services is certainly one of the biggest. And LA County may not be the biggest county in square miles, but it is probably the biggest county, without a doubt, in terms of population. What are we talking about now? Some 9 million people in the greater Los Angeles County area. So you can make a difference from where you are. And Christina, you raised your hand.
Hi.
Yeah.
So I appreciate the topic here, just because it feels like, and I'm sure many people on here might agree, that I have asked for things at work, or I feel there's a need, or I feel there's a policy that needs to be rewritten or relooked at. And I feel like I've asked so many times, and I'm really hoping by the end of this class there's some kind of strategy that I can use that can get me to get my policy on the agenda and my work, because, you know, national policies are great to look at, but, you know, for those of us who are actively working on the policies that we have at our workplaces, I mean, this would come in handy for me too.
Fantastic.
And I really appreciate you saying that, because it's true. Sometimes you do feel like you need a regime change, because how many times can you ask for the same thing? But maybe there's a different way. Maybe I'm just not asking it the right way, or maybe I'm not using enough evidence-based, I don't know, studies to get what I need or what the department needs. So thank you.
That's an excellent point, you know, and it's interesting because I think I mentioned to you before, Samantha says sometimes it's more about politics than your idea. Yes, that's true, but politics and ideas are very much related. You may have a great idea, but the people may not want to listen. That's absolutely true. But sometimes it's about explaining to people, using the right language, the right symbols, about how it relates to them. So, for example, right now there seems to be an impasse politically in the area of land management here in the state of Utah, where we have the ranchers who have used the common land that was part of an agreement between the federal government or they just don't care about your idea. That's true, Roxy. So how do you get them to care? Well, there's kind of an impasse, it seems, between the environmentalists in Utah that want to claim more and more pieces of federal land as kind of off-limits protection of the environment, that to protect it from overuse and overgrazing and overdevelopment. And then there's the ranchers who historically, and yes, that's appealing to their self-interest, exactly. But as the Denzon North article and the Denzon Manassi and Roy article shows us, self-interest is a matter of perception. It's not something axiomatic and predetermined. Sometimes our interests are very much aligned and we can't see it. And that's definitely the case between the ranchers and the environmentalists. At the end of the day, both are interested in preserving the integrity of Utah land, right? But right now they see their interests as diametrically opposed and even inimical. But in fact, there are actually many things that are common between them, and sometimes it's about framing the issue in the right way. Has any of you seen the movie that Clint Eastwood directed and co-produced called Flags of Our Fathers? Has anyone seen that? I suggest you see that movie. It's a really powerful movie that revolves around the narrative of the World War II war memorial of the raising of the flag at Iwo Jima. We've all seen the sculpture, right, of the flag being raised and all this. And it's interesting, that symbol brought unity to the country to support the war. Before that campaign was launched, the United States could not, even with Pearl Harbor, get the consensus together to go fight in World War II. The United States government could not even sell enough war bonds to finance the war effort. And actually, that sculpture and that story ended up becoming part of a public relations campaign that was largely inspired by the U.S. Department of the Treasury to sell war bonds, as though buying war bonds and supporting the war effort was something patriotic and something that we could all get together and support on an emotional level. And it involved everything to do with framing. It involved everything to do with finding the right rhetoric, finding the right symbol, and to a certain amount of, and to a certain extent, involved a certain amount of political manipulation, because it turns out that the soldiers that were the models for that sculpture were not the original soldiers who actually raised the flag. That photo, that sculpture was based on a photo, and that photo took place a second. And those who were in the photo were not the original people that raised the flag. It was done later, afterwards. The photo was then taken, the sculpture was then made, and then the group who were in the photo then did a tour to help raise awareness of the importance of the war and explain the narrative, and this got all this buy-in from the American public. And symbols and words and rhetoric, and I'm not talking about propaganda, I'm talking about language for strategic use. Symbols for strategic use are very much important. So when you're thinking about your role as a policy consultant or policy advocate, which to a certain extent all public administrators are, right? We're all an advocate in some way. We're all working in some kind of, or whether we're in a nonprofit or even a for-profit. At some point, we're all an advocate because we believe in what we're doing, most of us. Very few people in the public and nonprofit sector are there exclusively for the money, right? We can agree with this, right? There's some kind of attachment on an emotional level, on a personal level, that we've made an investment into this cause or this environment. And I'm not saying we're always 100% happy, right? Or we always think we question what we're doing, we question the organization. I'm not saying it's all roses, okay, and unicorns, but at the end of the day, we believe in what we're doing, right? And so in a sense, we're all kind of advocate. And, you know, how we advocate and the language we use to try to, I mean, it goes back to Political Science 101, if you've ever taken a political science class as an undergraduate, which is part of the Title V requirement in the state of California. So if you went to college in the state of California, you no doubt took Poli-Sci 101 course or its equivalent. Lesson number 1, you want to get something done, you expand the conflict. This is a thing that affects me. Here's why it should affect you. And we talked about that in the slides from 2 weeks ago about what is the difference between a condition and a problem, and how do we convert a private condition or a private problem into a public problem? We have to explain. We have to make a case for how all this affects all of us, right? And you know, this situation, for example, with the explosion of the bomb in Syria, this has awakened a lot of particularly generation baby boomers and generation X folks who grew up with the duck and cover drills in the public schools, right? They see a bomb like that. We see a bomb. I'm throwing myself in this category. And we kind of get freaked out because we're like, we were told, you know, kind of like we lived in the era of the 70s and 80s, 60s, 70s, and 80s when, you know, the Cold War was alive and well, and almost we were always afraid of the looming prospect of World War III and nuclear war. I don't think millennials are quite, I don't think it's as salient as an issue for them. Why? Because they weren't doing duck and cover drills back in public schools. In many cases, I mean, the things they would tell us were actually ridiculous. I was 5 years old and say, okay, now duck and cover, and if the light comes in, don't look at the light. Yeah, I won't look at the light because I'll be looking at my skin come off my skeleton, but So, so it is all about explaining how this affects other people. And that involves a narrative. And it involves the invoking of symbols. It involves invoking certain language. There's an expression, only Nixon could go to China. Why? Because Nixon was kind of a symbol of anti-communism. He was a symbol of hardline policy that was juxtaposed to the candidates in the Democratic Party. And so when Nixon convinced the country that it was a smart and wise and appropriate thing to do is to recognize the People's Republic of China, though it was a communist country. And he instituted a policy called rapprochement with China. Nobody said, oh, there's a weakling on communism. Nobody said there's a guy who's about to give the country away. Now, if George McGovern had been president at the time, and George McGovern had tried to normalize relations with China or the Soviet Union, both of which happened during the Nixon administration, people would have said, oh, there's a weakling. He doesn't understand the threat. They would have not have supported it. So sometimes it's the messenger, it's the symbols that are used, it's the language that are used, it's the narrative that goes along with it, and it's all about convincing effectively how this problem, which you may not be aware of, affects you, explaining how it affects you and others. Does that sort of make sense? And so I want you to look at this paper as a way to sort of draw these concepts into making a case for how you would move it onto the agenda. If you think of it like that, I think it becomes less daunting. I think it becomes a little bit more accessible to you. Why? Because you're in the practice of making cases all the time for the things you believe in, working in the spaces that you're in. And I'm just asking you to expand your tool chest a bit that involves some concepts in public policy process and choose an issue that may not be an immediate program that you're necessarily in charge of right now or an immediate policy that you're responsible for implementing, that little part of it, but think of it a little bit bigger and think about how you would get it on the agenda. And I really don't care if it's the municipal agenda. I said federal, but you can use these concepts. You can tweak these concepts of how to move it onto a municipal agenda, a state agenda, a county agenda, a federal agenda. Most of the policy concepts we're going to go over and theories are at the federal level, but you don't necessarily have to stick with that. If you can explain how they're relevant to helping you move the policy or program that you're trying to either adopt or reinvigorate, then by all means do it. I want you to really be flexible. I want you to really be creative. Does this make sense? Yeah? Do you feel a little bit more comfortable with what you need to do? Any concerns?
So I still, sorry.
No, go ahead.
You said the process on the agenda.
Yeah.
Does it mean we pick the topic and then we did the research? What kind of policy the United States or we have? So then related to policy change?
Yes. Yeah. So some of you, for example, have wanted to do a policy in other countries. So some of you chose Canada, and Canada is great because a lot of the stuff I've seen actually used in the literature in Canada. Others of you have asked you can I use this in Mexico or the Philippines? And my thing is I don't have a problem with that, but just be aware this is about how to move something onto the agenda where there's participation involved in the policy process. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a pure democracy because first of all, there's no such thing as a pure democracy, number one. But number two, there are different levels of participation involved with different kinds of democracy. So for example, in the Scandinavian countries and the Germanic countries like Germany and Austria and Scandinavian countries of Northern Europe, these are not what we call pluralist open democracies. In other words, anyone just can't form an interest group and try to move something on the agenda. They have to do it through a very, they have to do it basically through these societal organizations that look a lot like big umbrella interest groups, and they have to get buy-in for that. And there's this kind of more exclusive access to the government agenda that must be brokered through what we call these peak associations or these peak organizations that that are not part of the government, but they're sanctioned by the government. In other words, government gives them a license to lobby government, right? And they're called peak associations. We don't have that here. We have what's called a pluralist democracy, in which basically if you have the resources, and that means, and Trump understands this better than anyone. The guy didn't hardly spend anything on his election campaign. One of the things he realized was the resource of controversy, just getting the camera to spend time on him, right? Hillary Clinton spent well over $1 billion on her campaign, and the record is coming out, had to apologize to President Obama, who had to give her a call and say, make the concession. She apologized to him because she had hired the best people in the business to help her run her campaign. And here was a guy getting free media just by saying ridiculous things, right? So how policy change to move our policy topic agenda would affect you and create the results. Yeah, exactly. And people don't always see how a thing affects them. A colleague of mine is an expert on how crises motivate paradigm changes in government. His name is Mark Blythe. And Mark Blythe wrote a book called Austerity, The History of a Dangerous Idea, that sort of criticizes the approach of government cuts during a time of recession. And he says that austerity has the appeal of confusing virtue with vice, and it has the kind of good common sense or apparent good common sense logic of telling people, okay, we're in this crisis because we've overspent, and austerity are the cuts that we need to do to get us back on track. And it's the moral thing to do because the economic collapse that we've had was us spending out of control, doing things that we shouldn't be doing. And so the only remedy is to go through some pain after the party by adopting policies of austerity and cutting back and tightening our belts. And it sounds like a nice logic. The only problem is, he says, historically speaking, empirically speaking, it doesn't work. It actually makes things worse. And he's an expert on explaining how crises and the construction of crises, the social construction of crises, since we went over social construction theory this week, and our speakers are going to be talking about social construction, that crises are socially constructed phenomena. You know, and I remember seeing him at a conference back in 2001, and in a Scottish accent, he says, how do you know when you have a crisis? No, if a Mack truck comes barreling through your living room, that's not a crisis. That's a freaking disaster. Do you hear what I'm saying? Right? And he's right, you know, and it's like, how do you know when you have a recession? And I think I may have told you the story before. When Ronald Reagan was running against Jimmy Carter in 1980 election, he was giving a speech in New Jersey Shore with the Statue of Liberty in the background back here to give a patriotic speech about his tax cuts and about freeing up private individuals and freeing up private businesses and, you know, cutting back government, which he said, you know, government isn't the solution. Government is the problem. You know, this is how he talked in plain language where people can understand it. And then he went on to say, you know, when President Carter was asked about a recession. Sounds Irish, huh? let it be said for the record that the president hid behind a dictionary, where a recession is when your neighbor loses his job, a depression is when you lose yours, and I say that our economic recovery is when Jimmy Carter loses his, right? I mean, so really, what is a recession? What's the difference between a recession and a depression? How do we know that we're in a recession? You know, there are people that say that we've been in a jobless recovery for the past 5-6 years. But there are people that haven't felt that recovery. And you know what? There are people that haven't felt the recession either. So how do you know when you're in, right? Well, the Federal Reserve says that when you have 3 quarters of slow growth, that's a recession. But you need somebody to be able to collect the data. You need the instruments to be able to collect the data, to measure the data. You need analysts to interpret the data. And then you need the reporting mechanisms to communicate the data and how this matters. That's a construction, right? This is not something that's readily apparent to people. It can't be. Somebody has to tell the story. But before you can tell the story, you have to be able to see the thing you're talking about in the first place. In 1986, a nuclear power plant by the name of Chernobyl exploded in a meltdown in Kiev, in the Ukraine. And it sent a fire raging into the sky, reaching, I think, the stratosphere. I mean, like, that's how high the explosion was. You could definitely see it in Poland, but you might not be able to see it in Italy. But there were some atmospheric scientists in Scandinavia who were taking weather measurements that day, and their instruments went off the charts because of the radioactive cloud of iodine that was floating over Europe that no one would have necessarily have seen, right? But they happened to be unintentionally taking, they were intentionally taking weather atmospheric measurements, and their instruments began to register this radioactive movement across the sky. We would not have known, the West would not have known about Chernobyl if that hadn't been registered. We needed the instruments to do it. We needed to be able to see it, measure it, confirm it, and we needed to be able to communicate what a danger this was. And the scary part was it rained within a week, almost immediately after that happened, which means a lot of that radioactivity fell literally into the ground all across Europe. So, and we would not even known about it, right? We were able later to confirm it, and we were able to see the ultimate potential problem of this and so forth, but we had to be able to see it. So does that make sense? And so this paper is about making how you would explain how to build a critical mass to move this thing onto the agenda, using concepts from the reading. And the reading is actually, if you can get through some of the words that explain the meaning and the lessons in the readings are actually pretty cool. And I admit at times the way academics write, and I'm guilty of this, can seem a bit esoteric, bit wordy, try to impress our colleagues, right? But actually there's some good stuff in there that has some really definite applications. And sorry, I can't know your responses the way how you're receiving this information when I sit in a face-to-face class, which is always the challenge of an online class. At least I can see some of you on the image view. But is this making sense? For those I can't see, if you could just kind of give a gentle yes or no. It's okay if you need to rethink your topic. Do you have any questions? And that's part of the process, going through, trying to figure out, how you would want to go about this. And that's why I had you post early on your topics. So I'd be able to sort of say, you know, I think this is okay because you narrowed a bit more, or this is really excellent, or if you're going to do that country, think about some of these dynamics. Okay.
I have a question.
Sure.
So the historian in me wants to go back and see what's already been tried and what has failed.
Yep.
But I don't want to do it like as if, oh, well, here's what's been done, because obviously you want more of what would you do, spin it a different way. How would you
do it? Yep.
But, you know, as far as like going through other countries or examples that things have been successful, could we use those as an example?
Absolutely.
Refer.
No, you don't need to reinvent the wheel. If you see something from something that stands out, I just want to see that you're thinking about this.
Okay.
Yeah. And Raphael wants us to move on to the presentation. Does everyone agree with that? Okay, let's do it then. So I've given, who did I give the co-host powers to?
Hi, everybody. Hi.
Hello.
Hi. Okay, let me share my screen. I don't know. Put it on mute. Okay, is this good?
Do you want to do the slideshow version of it, or do you want to do it like this?
I could do a slideshow version. I think some people have their notes underneath.
Okay, then that's fine. However you guys set it up.
Okay, great. Why can't I see? Okay, perfect. Okay, hi everybody. So we're week 4. My name is Roxy. Elo's in our team, Samantha, Katya, Emily, Sandra, and Fredolyn. And our presentation will be on problem definition. So I'm going to go ahead and Sandra can start off.
Hi, everyone. So for the next 4 or 5 weeks, we'll all be discussing the different stages that go into the policy-making process, right? Today, we'll begin by discussing the first step, which is problem definition, as Roxy mentioned. And basically, what is worthy of public action? That's what problem definition has to do with. There's no single agreed upon list of problems, as we all know. Go ahead. Oh.
Sandra, just let me know when to...
Oh, go ahead. Next slide.
All right. Perfect.
Okay. So this is accomplished by looking at different agendas. As a professor mentioned, some issues that may have once been viewed as private become now public issues. Or this can also be when individuals share beliefs and they may reach a consensus on the need to solve a certain problem. This is also known as social construction. Go ahead and go on to the next slide. Shared beliefs or views among a group of individuals about an issue that needs resolution is social construction. Beliefs are mental and psychological constructions that people develop over time about the world that they live in. People share these beliefs and their interpretations and result in a joint reality, and such beliefs may or may not reflect what is really taking place. Go ahead. And so there are 4 different types of socially constructed target populations. The first one is the advantaged group, and these are viewed as positive and strong. We have the contenders, which are negative and strong. We have the dependents, which are considered positive and weak, and then the deviants, which are negative and weak. The social construction of a group will determine how society treats such a group. So an advantaged group obviously is more likely to get things done than the deviants will be. Okay. So how does this tie into policy identification? Before a problem can be deemed as a reality, it must first be identified as one. Identifying a problem results from a condition that is viewed as a social problem. Policy problems are considered social constructions because they result from people's beliefs about the need to take public action on a particular issue. So what are some of the drivers of problem identification? People's views about an issue are driven by more than personal experiences. Also, due to lack of understanding or incorrect information about public policy, people make up their own interpretations of how issues need to be resolved. This can lead the policy process to be led by misinformation or biases. And as we all know, news media significantly drives the issues that people view as important, which takes me to my next point, which has to do with framing. Framing is highlighting a certain aspect of a problem in a specific manner or strategy for the purpose of obtaining political support that will lead to agenda change. Framing allows for actors in the policy process to obtain buy-in from those that would otherwise be uninterested. And the framing strategy can make or break the success of a policy agenda at hand. Go ahead. So, basically, what is problem definition? As according to Rochefort and Cobb, simultaneously explain, recommend, convince, and persuade others to see issues in ways that moves them to act. Problem definition also encourages to emphasize the importance on the issue by demonstrating the social significance, long-term effects, simplicity, and novelty for society. And once these problems are identified, they need to be prioritized in some manner. And this is 5 steps in which that are taken into account when identifying a problem. The first one is causality. What is causing the policy or problem? Second one is severity. The severity, how severe is the issue, definitely helps us prioritize. Problems that are affecting more people with potentially traumatic effects will obviously supersede those that don't affect as many people. The incidence, how often has an event been deemed undesirable or continuously present? The higher the incidence, the more likely it is to make public agenda. Proximity, how strong does an issue resonate with an individual or group? Due to the subjectivity involved, framing can significantly impact. And lastly, crisis. A catastrophic event that causes suffering or uncertainty obviously is going to be high on the priority list when it comes to problem identification. So that's all for me.
All right, our next presenter is Katya.
Hi, everyone. So I am going to talk about the readings that were assigned for this week. So the first article was Shared Mental Models, Ideologies and Institution by Denza and North. So the article talks about different mental models and institutions our mind creates, which are important in the way we build the environment around us and the interactions we have with it. So shared mental models are described as individuals processing the information given to them in their own way and then creating their own opinions about it. Ideologies and institutions are classes of the shared mental model. Our minds create internal representations to interpret the environment we live in, and the institutions are the external mechanisms we create to structure and order the environment. So in any institution that we are in, we're going to have various outputs and opinions about information we receive. Then from that information, we are going to create like our own decisions about it, and same goes for us as employers or managers and so forth. Our minds, go back. Our minds create internal representations to interpret the environment we live in, and the institutions are the external mechanisms. Sorry, I read that already. So the quote in the article says, ideologies are the shared framework of the mental models that groups of individuals possess that provide both interpretations of the environment and the prescription as to how the environment should be structured. So, for example, in my workplace at UCLA, we have monthly meetings. In these monthly meetings, so many different managers, employees discuss any problems that have arisen in the last month. We discuss any new policies that are going to be taking place, any new features that we're going to implement at UCLA, maybe with check-in patients and so forth. So everyone will start discussing, giving their own opinion. Everyone will have their own ideas, but in the end we come together and we combine everything and then make a decision with those ideas that were given during a meeting. So that's just one example. What features do individuals choose to create a successful environment and a rational model? Does anyone remember what rational model was from our last week assignment? Can anyone answer that? Anyone? So rational model was basically, you know, having everything organized and not having disorganization or discombobulation like in any type of organization. So the article goes into what features could make for that. So complexity, how complex are mental models required to be for one to make a reasonable choice? We try to pick models we are familiar with and will be useful for us in the end. Second, motivation, how important are the models and choices one will make to that individual? And to what extent does he or she believe that the choice made can truly have an effect on the outcome? So again, like going over motivation, we constantly hear about motivation in a lot of topics we've been going over in the past few months. So yeah, so that has to do with mental models and institutions as well. Next slide, please. Okay. So the article continued in this slide. Individuals with common culture backgrounds and experiences will share reasonable convergent mental models, ideologies, and institutions. Individuals with different learning experiences will have different theories to interpret the environment. So let's say in my meeting, there was someone that went to CSUN and did health administration like me for their bachelor's. They might have learned specific topics and might give the same input as I might give during the meeting, or ideas and so forth. So that's what that bullet was saying. Second, a single individual cannot directly learn how everything around them works as it is too complex. The structure of the mental models are taken from experiences of each and every individual. These experiences are specific to one's environment. An uncertain individual will take from its external environment, learn from it, and create and improve his mental model. So we take things that happen around us every single day. We'll take things from our workplace, we'll learn from it. We'll take things from home, we'll learn from it. We'll take things from classes and we'll learn from it. And then we'll create the environment we want to be in. Another quote was, mental models are shared by communication, and communication allows the creation of ideologies and institutions in a co-evolutionary process. This will improve economic performance. So communication is key. I didn't know if anyone had any mental models or examples that, you know, that they might have seen in their organization that improved performance in any way. Anyone or any questions? Okay, next slide. This is just a summary. So the article explores how individuals attempt to structure and order their environment and also how they communicate with each other. Ideas are crucial in order for people and organizations to evolve, and the way the ideas are communicated to others is an important aspect to always consider. Institutions and the belief structure are critical constraints on those making choices and are therefore an essential ingredient of model building. So the next reading is going to go, was the chapter 4 in our book, The Rise of Modern Welfare. This is starting off by talking about the Great Depression. These are things that most of us might have learned in school before. So just going over 1920s, early 1930s, economic crisis of the 20th century. Spending and investments went to an all-time low and workers were laid off. The government soon created policies and new administrative systems to protect their markets from further damage. Example was the beggar thy neighbor policies were implemented. These were tariffs on imports and currency deductions. And then John Keynes, I'm saying it right, Economic Ideas, the Macroeconomics, a shift from individual to the behavior of economic actors in a country as a whole. And then his ideas in economics, which were basically increasing government expenditures, lowering taxes to stimulate demand, which helped the global economy, and this was a key feature of getting them out of the depression. Different countries approached the crisis in their own way. There was Germany, which was the first nation to respond to the economic crisis. There was spending initiatives and projects developed. US was the election of FDR and introduction to the New Deal. And he established the Works Progress Administration, WPA. This employed millions of people And one example was having like building roads and construction work, which brought a lot of employees and helped get out of the depression. Next. So connecting these two readings to public policy. So Denso and North illustrate the importance of ideas, how they are communicated among individuals. The government, local or state, needs to evaluate the environment that surrounds them to create their own mental models and to be able to make critical decisions for the public. After ideas are evolved, policies and structures are put into place to have other communities served. So I gave an example of just meetings at my work, but imagine meetings at a higher level. A lot of people are giving their opinion, a lot of people are giving their ideas, and they're all coming from their own environment that they lived in and their own world that, you know, their minds are in. So they're creating policies based on those discussions. And chapter 4 of our book discussed specific policies that were put into place when it was a great need for it during the Great Depression, like Beggar Thy Neighbor.
Okay.
That's it. Thank you.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My topic was on the other, sorry, let me just move this. On the other article that the professor sent, the title is Learning to Cooperate, Applying Deming's New Economics and Dezau and North's New Institutional Economics to Improve Interorganizational Systems Thinking. So this article, I'm not gonna lie, it was really complicated, so I try to simplify it as much as I can, so bear with me. So this article starts off by explaining that public administrators usually go in blind and they're not aware of the repercussions of their decisions. The article introduces a theorist named W. Edward Deming, and he believed that in order for agencies to cooperate across organizational boundaries and really get the work done, management and leaders must shift their focus from an individual department level to a systems level. This became known as systems thinking. So simply put, systems thinking is a series of functions of activities that exist both within and external to a given organization that must all work together to accomplish a common aim. So the systems thinking theory is now formulated into a model called the systems of profound knowledge. And all the categories of this system are interrelated and have direct influence within each other. So Deming firmly believed that management and leadership goals were to promote organizational effectiveness by including all internal and external interactions, as opposed to the traditional concept of independent departments governed by different chains of command. So the shared mental model explains that in traditionally managed organizations, communications that occur among agencies result in various inputs of the shared information. So each individual possesses the shared information, processes the shared information differently based on their mutually exclusive preconceptions of the subject matter, just how Katya touched base. And in the shared mental model, it is important that all the information presented receives similar interpretation so that all the members are on the same page. And so this article mentions that currently the political and economic world of business is really highly competitive and is basically a dog-eat-dog world. But on the other hand, the public sector is more so about fostering collaboration and communication and doing what's best for the community and people in a local, state, and national level. And as a result, both the public and private sectors are always in a fierce competition of scarce resources, which leads to an atmosphere of mistrust. And unfortunately, both these opposing entities do not see that at times they are both in the pursuit of a common goal, and thus they are both missing out on fostering collaboration and combining both of these systems together.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to talk about the Industrial Revolution, which was part of our readings. I'm kind of tied in what Sandra, Roxy had talked about in regards to social construction and shared interest. As we know, in Britain, the Industrial Revolution started there. So production was now went from making products from at home and from using small tools and at hand and to factories and to using high-powered equipment. And from there was mass production. Of course, there was some beneficials in regards to the Industrial Revolution. You know, there was jobs, the fiscal impact for the country. And of course, there's the negative part of the Industrial Revolution. Because of the factories and high production and also the machinery, Therefore, there needed to be workers. And so people from the countryside came over to Britain, to the factories for these jobs. As we know, I don't know if it's the same for anybody out there, when the market kind of took a crash and there was limited jobs out there, I know a lot of my fellow peers were, taking any jobs that are out there. A job's a job, a job. So there was a good amount of people coming over to these factories for the jobs, which led to a series of things. For example, because of the factories, it led to high levels of pollution. For the people coming over to these factories, it led to overcrowding, and putting pollution and overcrowding together eventually leads to poor health. So there was the positive and the negative impact. Now, mind you, the factories were owned by the middle and upperclassmen. So during that time and age, their voices were more prominent as opposed to the workers. Given these negativities led to the increase in social assistance. Now, mind you, the social assistance was paid from the middle and upperclassmen through their taxes, because there was a wave of people coming on board. Therefore, the social assistance costs increased. Again, the middle and the upperclassmen, since they had the upper hand and the louder voice, it impacted them the most. Therefore, their cries to the government was a lot more prominent, which led to the Poor Law of 1834. Their shared views of, not wanting to carry the same amount of cost for this increase in the social assistance was the shared interest, the social construction that this group of people believed that they shouldn't be sharing the cost of the social assistance. The Poor Law of 1834 was to relieve them of this cost and basically put the burden onto the workers. Unfortunately, this didn't go down so well. They were paid very little. They were placed in workhouses where the conditions were very poor. So it didn't help in any way. It eventually tumbled to something bigger, and they had a larger complaint, so to speak, to the government because of the poor conditions and because of the minimal workplace that they were at. Therefore, you can imagine that the production might have decreased because of the lack of the working conditions, and also the lack of workers, so to speak, because of poor health. Eventually, this led to the overturn of the Poor Law Commission, who oversaw the administration and the operations of the Poor Law of 1834. So as we can see, during that time period, the shared interests was that the middle and upperclassmen did not want to share the social assistance cost for the Industrial Revolution.
Okay, hi everybody. I'm Samantha Aguilar, and I'm going to be discussing a national problem. As most of you know, we all deal with traffic and the horrible traffic that we have going on here in California as well as nationally. 87.9% of Americans' daily commutes use private vehicles, so we don't have a lot of public transportation that's being utilized. Millions of people want to travel at the same time, which we know everybody's trying to get somewhere. Roads don't have the capacity to handle peak hour loads without forcing people to wait in line for limited road space, and waiting in line is the definition of congestion. So clearly we have that issue nationally. Traffic congestion is worse in other countries because American roads are better, and traffic congestion will continue to get worse because population continues to grow. Now, here are some ways that we can cope with the problem. There are 4 suggested ways any region can try to cope with mobility challenge. First off, they can charge peak hour tolls. The government could charge drivers to enter all lanes on major commuting roads during peak hours. If tolls were set high enough and collected electronically with smart cards, the number of vehicles on each major road could be reduced enough so that traffic would flow more quickly. The problem with this is that tolls would obviously be rejected by Americans because tolls would favor wealthier or subsidized drivers and harm poor ones. This would cause resentment towards the government, and tolls would also be viewed as another tax. So even though that's one way to cope with it, it's not really one that's feasible right now.
Another way to cope is building more roads with higher capacity. The issue that we have with that is right now it's too expensive. We don't really have the land space to do that, and it's impractical for the negative environmental impact. For example, we're going to have to cut down trees in order to broaden the roads and do a lot more harm to the environment. Another option would be expanding public transit. Public transportation is only concentrated in a few large areas in America. As we know, New York would be one of the highly used ones. Public transportation, everybody uses the subway. Nobody really uses cars out there. Even if America's transit capacity increased, the morning peak hour transit travel would rise to 11% of morning trips, but would reduce private vehicle trips only by 8%. So they're pretty much saying that regardless of us trying to promote public transportation, a lot of people still prefer to use their own private transportation. And one way to cope is also using the Waze app, which I'm not sure a lot of you have heard about, but it does update live with traffic. So if there is a backup in traffic, it's going to give you an alternative route that kind of goes around. It'll give you a side street. So that's one way that we're kind of coping now, but not everybody knows about it. Not everybody uses it, and they still are using the more congested routes. The future ways to cope that they have in the works are smart cars, which are going to be known as self-driving cars, and they're going to be developed to follow cars more closely without crashing, so more cars can fit on congested roads and move quicker. So with this, you're not even going to have to worry or pay attention. The cars are just going to move for you. So it's not going to be one person that fell asleep at the wheel, which I'm sure we all are honking and go. It's going to expedite the moving of the cars as quickly as possible. And just wanted to see if any of you are dealing with any of this, or if you have any ideas, or you think that the smart cars may work, or you think that you would ever want to pay for one of the tolls that were put into effect to save yourself for some traffic? No? Yes? All right.
Sorry, Samantha, I'm sorry. What was the question? I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just saying if anybody thought, that adding a toll would be a good idea, or you guys think, most Americans feel that.
Honestly, I drive a lot sometimes up north, and it drives me crazy when I have to know that I have to pay tolls on something that I know should be taken, that I'm paying already from my state or federal taxes, more so my state taxes. It just drives me crazy when I drive up to San Francisco, and I always have to pay those tolls. It's ridiculous. And every time I go by the Golden Gate, when I come back, I forget, and then sure enough, I get a bill for like $17 or something like that.
Oh, so annoying.
It's ridiculous, and I just passed it twice, and so that's if you don't go into the Golden Gate Bridge. It's upsetting to know these toll roads just upset people. I think so. Unless you're driving to a heavily traffic like the 57 freeway in Orange County, that one you need a toll, I guess, to get out of that. But it's upsetting.
All right. Well, thanks, Rafael.
No problem.
Anybody else? Okay, we'll go on to the next person. Thank you, guys.
Hi, guys. My name is Elo. So I'm going to be talking about California and its uneven economic growth. So in brief, while California's economy is showing gradual signs of recovery, that recovery has been marked by uneven growth among regions, uneven growth among industries, and high unemployment and high underemployment, which I'll talk about as well. So coastal unemployment rate right now, it's 3.9%. Inland unemployment rate is about 21.6. Part of that is also because, I'll talk about that. The state has gained over 2 million residents, adding more than 500,000 to the labor force, which is why California's unemployment rate is still kind of up there. There's also a lot of underemployment in California, if we see on Table A. That's because there's a lot of people who only have part-time jobs. There's a lot of industries and a lot of industries and a lot of companies really that don't like to offer full-time jobs because they don't want to give the employee benefits or like health insurance, anything like that. So labor markets remain very weak since the recession. Next slide. So coping with the problem, for example, would be since the construction industry declined in 2007, One thing would definitely help is with California should work on building more buildings and houses for the rapidly growing populations, which will help rise the construction industry, which has actually been happening anyway. For example, like here in LA, I can talk about Glendale, downtown LA. There's a lot of more buildings now being built, so that's giving way more jobs now to the construction. Unemployment is a result of having, I've already talked about that, citizens working only part-time jobs. If there are more full-time positions offered, the state will have an incline in underemployment, as well as giving individuals better benefits. Better public assistance should be provided in the coastal areas, like they're being offered in the inland areas, which will lessen the congestion of overpopulation in the inland areas. So if there would be better assistance, let's say San Diego or any other place like that in the coastal area, more people would be going over that way rather than, let's say, San Francisco, LA especially. Also approve policies which attract businesses to California in all the regions, which stimulate job growth and enable full-time employment. California's economy has been fighting strong to recover from the recent recession. There's an obvious job growth. However, there are many factors that should be more concentrated on in California, such as underemployment and uneven job growth across California. In all the regions, if all the regions would offer the same benefits to citizens, there would be a chance that the population in the inland areas will be less congested and instead spread evenly. And that is it for me.
Okay, hi everybody, my name is Emily and I will be talking about a local practice example. So many of us know, who are familiar with LA County, that the rise in homelessness has gone up. From 2015 to 2016, LA saw a 6% jump in homelessness. LA has the second largest homeless population in the country, about 46,874 people. Homelessness has become more visible in parts of the county, and you can a lot of people can see the number increasing by just looking out in the streets, under freeway overpasses, or especially in the LA County area where there's the, as many as you know, of Skid Row. And then, so basically the mayor even said that homelessness in Los Angeles will not be solved in overnight. It's a long-term crisis that requires a long-term solution. Next slide. And many have reported all of these increases and have said ending the chronic homelessness will be feasible if fewer people become homeless. And this requires the combined resources of health, mental health, social services, education, justice system, and housing agencies to restore place in the community for homeless individuals. It will be important not to just put a roof over people's heads, but also to develop programs that get at the root of problems. For many homeless people, there are issues deep down inside them that they will need to deal with. A lot of the times it's not just a matter of getting a house. And then the next slide. So recently, there was Measure 8 that was approved, and this measure comes on the heels of voters' approval of Proposition HHH in November, which is a property tax bond measure aimed at raising $1.2 billion to build 10,000 affordable housing units for the homeless. But like mentioned in the previous slides, it's not only about building housing, but also ensuring that people can stay out of the streets. So Measure 8 would generate about $355 million annually for homeless programs over 10 years. The tax increase would raise the sales tax rate to 9% across most of LA County and up to 10% in few communities. Voters will see change in their sales taxes when July 1 rolls around. But as you can see, a lot of people voted yes for it, 61%, and 39% voted for no. But a lot of people do think that this is a measure that will definitely change the homelessness population in LA County.
I'm going to talk about the California drought. As you know, as everybody knows, except for the professor, we've been in the California drought for the past 5 years. It wasn't just till recently where the Governor Brown declared end to the state of the emergency for the terrible drought that we're in. And so there are several impacts, in regards to the drought. There's the economic impact for the farmers who were affected by the drought due to the crops being destroyed. There's also the environmental impact. This led to the loss of fish and wildlife due to the low food supply and the low water levels. There is also a social impact. Because of the less water, therefore there's more dust. So it impacts anybody that has, severe allergies. Next slide, please. So how do we prepare for the California's next drought? As we all know, I've lived in California since I was 4 years old. And we know that, especially Southern California, it's definitely semi-arid. We don't get a lot of rain like Northern California and Oregon and Washington. How do we prepare for it? We definitely have to keep the mindset that conservation is definitely the way of life for the Californians. And ways to prepare for California's next drought is to definitely educate residents on how to be more water resistant using drought resistant plants. For example, I know like at my daughter's school, they have handed out these little 5-minute hourglass for them to use when they take a shower to cut down on shower time. Also, another way to prepare for California's next drought is to definitely push our local city managers on creating a drought plan, an effective drought plan, and raise funding so that next time we're not so much in a issue as to how do we deal with this drought, and to also be better prepared. That's it.
That was really excellent. Can everyone hear me? Because I turned off my camera, I thought, so that we could focus on the speakers, but that was really excellent. Can people see me, by the way? Because my camera's showing on, but I thought I had shut it off so that...
Yeah, we can see you.
We can see you.
Okay.
Do you want me to stop sharing the presentation?
If you could, so I can see all of you.
Sure.
Because right now it's taking up my whole screen. Okay, great. Well, that was excellent. I'm going to really appreciate that. It was very well done. So, are there any questions for the presenters who did an awesome job? Okay, and Melissa says this post is related to slide section discussing jobs and unemployment. Create more industries, and government should provide more incentives to provide better funding. Manufacturers that went overseas coming back because the jobs we had went overseas, closed down shop, and folks here lost their jobs. Agriculture is the biggest thing out there. We need to create or find different ways of agriculture. Example, cotton. When we harvest cotton, earth takes a few years to get its balance back. Energy is another one. Use less oil and more natural energy to create jobs and even out the power of oil, which is the focus that is there right now.
Yeah, I can add to what Melissa said, actually, especially when Elo talked about her practice example.
Yep.
More specifically in Glendale, there's been a lot of apartments being built, and I think that's one version of urban planning at its finest and another version of public policy at its finest, because all those homes that are being built right now are very, very expensive, new developments, and it's not really gained or like geared towards local people that live there. A lot of out of town people come by and rent out the lofts, and they actually got the permits to build those apartment buildings through the city, and they made an agreement that, let's say, if one, I don't know, complex can house like 20 apartments, for example, 10 of those need to be geared for low-income housing. So that's just another example of like what Melissa said and how we can tie that into what's going on right now.
Excellent. So what I'd like to just sort of summarize why I thought this presentation was really well done, and sort of connect the dots. So when we're trying to make a case for moving something onto the agenda, we actually have all these different stakeholders and actors and multiple agencies on a system level that are ultimately affected or can affect the issue. But we don't always see that, right? We're not always aware of how interdependent. This is particularly salient in an era which we call network governance, where increasingly we're talking about an era of contracting out between government and private sector becomes much more common practice. And citizens are involved in citizens groups, and so on and so forth. We really need to start increasingly take a more systems approach. And I really appreciated the way you guys covered the essentials of the readings. And I know that Roxy was concerned that she didn't cover the article, which was a really complex article. It was a complex article, but she did it really well. And she hit all the points that were relevant for connecting the dots with the other readings and the topics and the slides. So that was really well done. As were the presentations. The examples were excellent from a systems perspective. And so the question then is, and I would just say one correction. We're not saying that the public sector is necessarily better than the private sector in building awareness, or that, you know, but that they really need to be. And it's even more crucial. And there are more obvious points in which cooperation is ought to be more recognized, and this is not in all cases. And so we need to really, I mean, it's particularly an important thing to generate awareness of the interdependence of agencies and non-governmental organizations in the policy process. And so this is where the social construction piece of it comes in, which the group started off with. The framing is essential. How do we get people to see the connections and the commonalities between them? In an era when the government is, and the public sector is constantly under scrutiny, there's a negative view of government and what government can do. And yet it's essential that they get involved and mitigate many of these complex or wicked social problems. And these are highly complex. And we need multiple actors involved. And as a policy consultant, how do we get those actors involved and make sure that all their ships are sailing in the right direction as an armada, rather than them going in all different directions and creating havoc in a harbor where they're running into each other? Or worse, competing for trading lanes, right? And knocking each other out of the way and competing against each other in a bad way. Competition isn't in and of itself a bad thing. The way we compete and what the end game is. If the end game is competition, rather than getting the thing done, that's where it becomes. If the end game is let's get something done, and the best way we can test out which is the best in a marketplace of ideas, if you like, is through competition, that could actually be a very healthy and positive thing. Because the end game is, how do we end up working together, not how we knock out the competition, but rather we compete with others over ideas. And so framing from a policy consultant perspective is essential. And then the reading dealing with the 1800s is really important for a juxtaposition of systems thinking. Why? Because the kind of way, piecemeal, ad hoc way, social problems were tackled during the 1800s was really bad. And it was also kind of occurring along the time that we had the birth of scientific management, which we call Taylorism. And Taylorism is all about improving the efficiency of parts. It does not take on a systems view. It's about organizations and making individual organizations efficient within their own internal ranks. And most organizations, public and private, operate in the 21st century using 19th century methods of the 1800s in the way that they're organized hierarchically, in the way that they focus on a very narrow understanding of efficiency, the way they ignore the importance of cooperation and coalescing and working together. They don't even see it that way, right? So now we're in an era which we call the new public management. It came out of the 1980s, which is all about making organizations more efficient and transparent. But that becomes the end game. To what end? What do we get by doing the wrong thing more efficiently, right? What do we do about making our organization work as parts really well to the detriment of a system and cooperation? So let me read some of the comments here. Right, but at this point, investing is difficult to. There's a really good conversation going on here about the housing issue, which is great, because that was a great example about, sort of how to deal with this kind of housing problem as kind of a systems issue, which it absolutely is. And it is a community issue. And we know that property values in neighborhoods and the value of our society suffers as a whole when there are people that are homeless. And we can see the ruining of society when where there's a huge gap between those who have and those who don't have. So, it's important to tackle these issues. And how do you convince someone who lives in Calabasas in a gated community that they should care about housing of homeless people living in downtown, and it's a direct relationship to how they live their lives and their quality of life? And it is when you take on a systems perspective, right? Because ultimately, we're talking about a common megalopolis in which they all live. We're ultimately talking about safety. We're talking about because people can't live in there and just stay in their own gated community, right? So at some point, it's all connected. But the question is, how do you convince people who don't think that they're affected by a problem that they need to get involved, because that problem may not affect them immediately, but it does affect them proximately in important ways. And so this is kind of what I wanted you to get out of this week's discussion. And the presenters did a fantastic job of distilling all this and making these connections between the themes that I thought needed to be emphasized this week. After their excellent presentation, do you feel, the rest of you, as though you can see these threads and these connections from a policy advocacy point of view, how they can be helpful? And I'm not saying you have to be experts, right? But starting to get into, the funny thing about this class is it won't be until the 8th week where all the stuff actually clicks, right? More social programs for the homeless. We need to take a deeper dive in the homeless population, why they are homeless, create programs, local ones, because federal won't work, because not every state has the same issue. That's absolutely true. Concept of local government to be in control of their own issues. Well, definitely flexibility. One of the things that was brought out about Industrial Revolution was the understanding of pollution. In that mental model, pollution was seen as an externality, right? It didn't involve a cost. We just simply pollute, and if you died of black lung, right, and then you had to go in and get hospital care for that, which was largely taking place in the nonprofit, not the public sector, largely by religious institutions who take care of the health of the poor, right? It fell upon them to take care of that. From a systems perspective, their environmental costs are something that are absorbed within a systemic context, and therefore, you'll hear it would not be unheard of. To hear of libertarians like Milton Friedman, for example, talk about the need for a carbon tax to promote responsible use. Because libertarians are not just about freedom for individuals, it's also largely about individual accountability and responsibility. And one of the things, there's nothing that promotes individual responsibility and accountability like costs, right? But if costs are externalized, you just might feel free to pollute and see it as something that's just a byproduct of production and or whatever we do, and we don't really need to worry about it. And it's, we reap the benefits of the thing that we're producing narrowly. The benefits are narrowly reaped, and the costs are broadly borne within society, but no individual agency, organization, or group necessarily has to bear the cost of that pollution. Impose a carbon tax, and now the people producing the pollution now bear the cost of it. And that will encourage them to behave more responsibly, or at least be more thoughtful in saying, well, if I'm going to produce a thing, I now have to include the costs of production, which include the pollution, in my costs. If I'm interested in bottom line, whether I'm a public agency or private agency, I'm going to be more careful about pollution, right? Brittany says, yes, the presentation was great and set the bar high with great examples and making it relatable. No question about that. Local restaurants write off taxes so that the poor can go there and eat. Yep. Create better housing by taxing the rich and have them create extra buildings. Lands out there sitting, use some of the taxes we pay to create the buildings. Big advantage to businesses to pay more with incentive of writing off taxes. So much you can do, absolutely. But ultimately, it is not good for the health of any economy or any stable democracy to have too big a disparity between the wealthiest and the poorest, right? It ultimately will affect us all. And so we need to, when you take on a systems view, and so policies that that benefit wealthier people should also be balanced with policies that that help out poorer people. And a perfect example of this was part of the Clinton-Gingrich welfare to work compromise, which there were many aspects of it that in the implementation phase could be regarded as abject failures. But one good thing was one landmark compromise was raising the minimum wage while giving small businesses a tax cut to help offset them, right? I mean, that's a systems view. And by the way, Newt Gingrich, by the way, was a big fan of Deming. In fact, they were personal friends. Newt Gingrich didn't miss any of Deming's birthdays in the later part of Deming's life. And you can't help but think that Newt Gingrich is working with Bill Clinton to work out bipartisan compromises and think across class lines, think across party lines. Part of this had to do with some kind of systems thinking. At least the argument can be made for that. What do you think? I have no monopoly on the truth. I just say what I think. You might have a different perspective. Some of you, I'm sure, do. That's okay. No one? Well, I really appreciated the presentation tonight and all of your good questions. I couldn't read all of them as they were coming in on the commentary, but it was a good discussion. This is being recorded, so you can read that discussion because there were a lot of good thoughts on the homeless situation that were being sidebar discussed, which I think is great. So we're now midway through the course. Just wanted to get your thoughts. How is this course going for you? I understand that this stuff is still new. And, but in terms of the organization, the way the material, which I admit, a lot of it is kind of difficult to process. How is the format working out? Is this conducive to a learning environment? Do you feel supported also with the projects that you're working on? And
I like it. It's different. It's different. I like it.
Okay, so that's helpful. And then Tedevik says, material is hard to understand sometimes after we read it a lot of times. And you're not the only one. I told you before, and I'm just going to be very candid. It's very important stuff, but I didn't get the stuff until I really started teaching it. Yeah, and to be honest with you, and I had to take my comp exam based on the same stuff I'm teaching here. So Queenie feels supported. That's great. So far, so good. I like that you went over a lot of the paper today, and I agree the reading is a little much too, but I know we need to learn. Yeah, and you don't have to, if you only walk away with some basic understanding of the concepts, you're in great shape. You're way ahead of me than when I took this course. I'm not exaggerating about that. I was kind of like, huh? You know, and unfortunately, I mean, I took it from a lovely professor, but he taught it very traditional way, not very applied. And that made it very difficult too. I really struggled with my public policy process course. It's ironic that you end up teaching the very thing that, I mean, I took a number of courses in my graduate program. The public policy process course I really struggled with. It was also one of the lowest grades that I took, by the way. So, which I'm anticipating that won't be the case for most of, if not all of you. But it does make me, because I struggled through it, I've tried to, because I know, but I also know how important it is. I've tried to create a course that I hope is something that creates value and meaning for the students in a very practical and applied way. Acknowledging the fact that this is theoretical stuff. But like W. H. Jennings said, there's no innovation without theory. Because without theory, you just keep on doing the same thing as you've always done it. You need to conceive of it, mental model. You need a new mental model that is outside the box, if you like, of your way of thinking before you can try something radically new. Otherwise, it's just incremental, right? And there are those that argue that the public sector is in kind of a crisis right now, and the nonprofit sector along with it, because they're so intertwined together. In fact, the lines are often blurred between the public sector and the nonprofit sector, particularly in healthcare, right? I mean, forget about it. I mean, there are no lines there. Because when you start talking about patients' rights, and you start talking about, the policies governing duty of care, right? Hospitals can't look at the financial costs and benefits if someone walks through their emergency room doors. They have to treat that person. It's no longer a nonprofit or a privatized issue. That is now a public problem. That is a public policy mandate. The hospital, whether it's public, private, or nonprofit, doesn't matter. At that moment, it becomes a public sector agency for all practical purposes, right? And subject to the same legalities, duty of care, mandates, and so on and so forth. And so understanding how this stuff works as a system is particularly salient, I think, when it comes to health administration. As you all know better than me, I only know what my students tell me. But, you know, when I used to run comp exam workshops out of Kaiser, Woodland Hills, which I did right there in the Woodland Hills facility, in their lecture rooms, you know, these are the concepts I would discuss with them. Listen says, oh, my home hospital. Yep. Used to work there. Yeah, well, I was born in Panorama City, in the tower that's, I don't think there anymore. Yeah. And now you're at Region. Well, my mother-in-law has an esthetician clinic right across the street from Kaiser, was Panorama City. So I can't seem to get away from Van Nuys. So every Christmas, we go to Van Nuys for Christmas, wife's family. So anyway, yeah, I mean, these are the concepts I think that are really gonna help you and my students give me feedback. And having graded over the years my share of CSUN comp exams, being able to demonstrate a strong conceptual background is really important. By the way, when do you guys take your comp exams?
This summer.
This summer?
Next summer.
Next summer.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Because I'm teaching a 697 comp exam class this summer at Glendale Community College. Samantha was like, thank goodness. Thought it was this summer. Oh, so you have a project. Okay. I didn't know if they were moving from project. Maybe with your cohort they're moving to project, but the current cohorts that they're in, they're going to be doing a comp exam, so I didn't know. Yeah, I can send you information about that, sure. So it's a project this summer. I like projects more than comp exams. Oh, it's an essay. Okay.
I think they had changed it to a comp exam starting fall of 2016.
Oh, really?
I think so.
Okay. That's. But I think for your application now to the public policy process, these concepts are really, I think, helpful if you think them through about how they can be. So, I mean, it's a tough class to teach, but I really enjoy it. Is that weird? I mean, because I really see the application if we think this through, and I didn't really started appreciating the importance of theory until I started working with the Deming Institute. And we had a really great conference a couple weeks ago in Bryce Canyon, and the focus of it was applying theory, particularly the system of profound knowledge that we went over this week in the public sector. That was the focus of it. And I do have the videos of the speakers that spoke at that. And we had some really great speakers, one of which we had the director of the Bryce Canyon National Park. He was one of the speakers. We had also the deputy campaign manager for Governor Herbert of the state of Utah, and she's a big Deming person and brings that into the public sector. And so if you'd like, I can make those links available to you. You can watch those speakers, because I think you might find it helpful in your practice. Well, that's all I have for this evening. If there are any questions, I hope you feel a bit more comfortable about the final paper, particularly after the presentation, which was awesome. Hope you feel a little bit more comfortable with the concepts for this week.
Send a rough draft or a little bit of it to you.
Sorry?
Would you mind reading like rough drafts?
Oh, I'm always willing to read a rough draft of anything that you're writing about.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, and in fact, there was an outline that's due, like I can't remember when, where I was trying to get you guys to put something on paper to move it along. May 5th. Okay, great. Yeah, to move the to sort of the way to approach, I think, any written project is start off with an outline. I think outlines are really important. Because if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there, and outlines kind of, while you're putting it together, then you know exactly what you're doing. Sometimes you have to tweak it once you start actually writing, but at least you have a direction. And getting feedback on an outline from a professor in a course, I think also provides a lot of self-confidence for the students, because if you're basically getting feedback that this is basically on track, now go execute it, you're not as nervous or as anxious as if you're just writing something from A to Z and you've never had any feedback on that, right? Then you're kind of just questioning the whole way along whether or not you're on track. So an outline provides a certain security blanket as well as a roadmap of how to complete the project that you're working on. So I encourage you, even before May 5th, if you want to send me by email, any kind of thing that any ideas. Obviously, the more detailed, whether it's a formal submission of an outline or just when you're emailing me, the more details you include, the more quality feedback I can give, right? If you send me something very skeletal, I'll say, yeah, this looks okay, but I need to see more to be able to actually give you more direct, more detailed feedback. Yep. And if you have any suggestions for improvement for the course, I'm telling you honestly, and I genuinely mean this, I don't take criticism personally. I take it seriously, but I don't take it personally. If you tell me a thing isn't working, I've been known to make the change literally after the session and go back and make that change. And as I told you before, at least I think I meant to tell you, one of the biggest things that's proven to contribute to student learning is the instructor's willingness to change. And I think that has to do more with attitude than the actual changes that are made in a given course. But I take what I teach very seriously, and I take my students very seriously. So if you have any concerns or suggestions of how to improve this experience, don't wait for the student evaluations. Those are too late. You can't do anything with those. I mean, do them and take those seriously. But if you see something that you think can be improved or something that's not working for you, let me know. Because if I know, then I can address it. And honestly, it doesn't in any way negatively affect your grade to give me constructive criticism. And then all criticism is constructive. At least I interpret it that way. Because I'm trying to create an experience that'll make it work for you. I really want you to learn this stuff. So that's it. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Okay, have a wonderful evening.
Bye, everybody.
Take care.